I never thought marriage could carry secrets so sharp they could cut you without warning. For years, I believed my husband's late nights at the office were nothing more than dedication to his career. That's what he told me, every time, with that tired smile and loosened tie. But one night, as I stared at my phone, his words didn't match his actions. "Working late," he texted me, yet my gut twisted, whispering that something was wrong. Maybe it was the silence in his voice. Maybe it was how quickly he ended the call. Or maybe it was the way he had stopped meeting my eyes weeks before. That night, curiosity won over trust. My fingers trembled as I opened his location sharing app, something we had set up long ago, back when transparency was easy and love was still untested. What I saw made my chest tighten. He wasn't at his office. He wasn't even near it. The glowing dot on my screen pulsed from a different place entirely. A neighborhood I knew well. And the address? My cousin's apartment. At that moment, my entire world cracked. The betrayal wasn't confirmed yet, but the possibility was enough to make my knees weak. How could he be there? Why would he be there? And that's when my story truly begins. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know, where are you watching from right now? I love hearing your stories in the comments. And if you enjoy stories of betrayal, secrets, and justice served cold, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Because, trust me, this story only gets darker. I sat there, staring at my phone, the light of the screen burning into my shaking hands. 1,000 excuses ran through my mind. Maybe he was helping her with something. Maybe she had called him in an emergency. Maybe I was just overthinking. But my heart didn't believe a single one of those lies. Memories rushed back. Family dinners, laughter. The way my cousin hugged me a little too long. The way she asked too many questions about my husband's job, his schedule. The pieces began to connect, one by one, until I could barely breathe. I remember whispering out loud, No, they wouldn't do this to me." But deep down, I knew the truth was sitting in that apartment. I grabbed my keys, slid on my jacket, and walked out into the night. The drive felt endless. Every red light mocking me, every turn pulling me closer to a truth I wasn't ready to face. And as I pulled up near her building, my stomach dropped. His car, right there, parked where it didn't belong. The betrayal I feared wasn't a shadow anymore. It was real, and it was waiting upstairs. I sat in my car, with the engine still humming, staring at his vehicle parked a few feet away. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned pale. The night air pressed against me, heavy, suffocating, and I couldn't decide whether to storm inside or drive away. What if I was wrong? What if I walked in there and embarrassed myself? What if my cousin really did need him for something urgent? But the longer I sat, the more I knew those excuses were just a shield for a truth I didn't want to admit, a truth that was already burning me from the inside. I turned off the engine. The silence was deafening. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the distant hum of the city, seemed magnified, as if the universe itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to... I stood outside, torn between bursting in and collapsing on the cold concrete. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was him. A message. "Don't wait up. Might be late again tonight." The audacity of it. He was inside, only steps away, lying to me in real time, with no hesitation. Tears stung my eyes, but anger rose higher. How many times had this happened? How many nights had I sat at home, waiting, cooking dinner, while he was here instead? How many lies had I swallowed just because I trusted him? I felt the urge to rush up and knock on the door, to scream, to demand answers. But something inside me whispered, "Not yet. Not tonight." Because the truth is, exposing them right there and then would give me answers, yes, but it would also give them power. Power to twist the story, power to deny, power to paint me as paranoid. No, I needed proof. I needed to be smarter than my rage. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the half-empty coffee cup he had left behind. He kissed me on the forehead before leaving, just as he always did, whispering, "Don't wait up tonight either, love." The words sounded sweet on the surface, but now they dripped like poison. For the first time in years, I didn't respond with a smile. Instead, I memorized every detail: the shirt he wore, the time he left, even the excuse he gave. My husband didn't realize it, but I had switched roles overnight. I wasn't his trusting wife anymore. I was his silent investigator. I began small. First, I checked the mileage on his car when he came home. His stories of late hours at the office didn't match the extra miles I saw every morning. Next, I looked at his receipts. Weeks passed, and I became more meticulous. I followed his patterns. Tuesday nights, always working late. Thursday evenings, suddenly urgent meetings. Friday, his phone conveniently ran out of battery. But I noticed something else. His cousin, my cousin, was always unavailable on those same days. Family dinners, outings, even simple phone calls. She always had an excuse. It didn't take a genius to connect the dots. My heart was breaking, but my mind was sharpening. One evening, when he left with yet another excuse, I quietly followed him. I parked a block away and watched from the shadows as he entered her building, carrying a bottle of wine like it was the most normal thing in the world. I didn't confront them. Not yet. Instead, I pulled out my phone and took pictures. The timestamp, the building. There comes a moment when silence feels heavier than words. For weeks, I carried the weight of his betrayal in my chest like a stone, smiling in public but screaming in private. At night, I would lie awake beside him, listening to his steady breathing. My hand would rest inches from his, but I couldn't bring myself to touch him. He was here, but he wasn't mine anymore. Every time his phone buzzed, I froze. Was it her? Were they laughing at me? Did they think I was a fool too blind to notice? One morning, as I poured his coffee, I saw lipstick on his color. Not mine. A shade of crimson I had never worn. My hand shook as I placed the cup in front of him. But he didn't notice. He simply sipped and kissed me goodbye, like a man playing house in a life he didn't value. That's when the tears finally came. Not loud, not messy, but silent. My body shivered as a week later, my cousin came over unexpectedly. She wore a bright smile, carried a basket of fruits, and acted like nothing was wrong. Her eyes sparkled with the same warmth I had once trusted. But now, I saw the lie hiding behind them. I looked at her hands, the same hands that probably held my husband hours before. My pulse quickened, my skin burned, and I forced myself not to scream. That evening, when she left, I stood at the window and whispered to myself, "Enough is enough." I couldn't just sit and watch while my family crumbled in silence. My home was being stolen, my dignity stripped away, my love turned into mockery. And if they thought I would remain the quiet wife who swallowed pain without a sound, they had underestimated me. The thing about plans is they don't have to be loud. In fact, the quieter they are, the more damage they do when they land. After the breaking point, I stopped reacting and started thinking. Every breath I took from then on had a purpose. First, I set rules for myself. No confrontations alone in the heat of the moment. No threats. No desperate calls. Anger can make you careless, and I couldn't afford carelessness. I wrote everything down. Dates, times, odd excuses, the little patterns that used to seem like nothing, but now formed a map. I filled pages with observations. The nights Hiko worked late. The weeks my cousins suddenly had plans. The receipts that appeared and vanished like sleight of hand. I recorded timestamps on my phone, saved texts, and kept screenshots in a folder labeled simply evidence. Then I tested the water. I didn't want to scare them into fighting.
With the evidence collecting like a slow drumbeat, I began weaving the social part of the trap. People often forget that reputation is a fragile thing. It can be shifted by a single well-timed truth. I started by planting casual concerns with family friends, questions that sounded more like confusion than accusation. "Has anyone seen Daniel around on Tuesday nights?" I'd ask in passing. "I got a flyer about a local charity event he'd normally attend. Did he go?" Those questions made people think. Some asked me later if I'd been worried. That was the point. I wanted others to notice the pattern too. At the same time, Uncle George and I prepared for the more formal steps. We walked into the title office together, asked about restrictions, inquired about recent activity. Nothing dramatic, just the kind of prudent vigilance that slows down a transaction and creates bureaucratic friction. The more boxes we checked, the more. The day it all came crashing together wasn't loud at first. In fact, it started like any other morning. Coffee, a glance at the garden, the sound of children laughing in the background. But underneath, the ground was shifting. Daniel had grown impatient. He had thought his scheme was simple. Push papers through, get signatures, and move the house before I ever noticed. But the title office had done exactly what Uncle George and I expected. They slowed everything down. They flagged inconsistencies. They asked for additional documents, and when Daniel tried to press, they pushed back. I found out when a polite woman from the office called me directly. She explained there had been activity on the property, but because of some concerns raised by interested parties, meaning me, the process was paused. My heart thudded as she told me no transfer can go through without a complete review. But the true blow didn't come from me. It came from whispers. Family whispers that spread faster than wildfire. Cousins talked to cousins, neighbors leaned closer at fences, and soon everyone knew that Daniel had tried to sell his own mother's home behind her back. The betrayal wasn't a rumor anymore. It was a fact. And facts, once loosed, have a way of reshaping everything. Invitations stopped coming for him. Friends who once praised him began asking quiet questions. Monica's coworkers whispered when she walked past. The secret they had built their lives on was no longer a secret. It was an open wound, visible to everyone. One night, I overheard Daniel on the phone, his voice low and desperate. "They're asking questions I can't answer." The confrontation didn't happen in a quiet room. It happened in the worst possible place for Daniel and Monica, at a family gathering. It was my sister's birthday, and everyone was there. Cousins, uncles, aunts, neighbors who were practically family. The kind of gathering where laughter and music usually filled the air. But that day, the atmosphere felt heavier, as if everyone was waiting for something to break. I almost didn't go. A part of me wanted to stay home, to avoid the stares, the whispers. But then I thought, why should I hide? This wasn't my shame to carry. It was theirs. So I went. and I walked in with my head high. The room quieted for a moment when I arrived. People tried to.
Daniel snapped. His voice rose above the chatter. You don't understand. I was trying to do what's best for us, for our future. Mom doesn't need that big house. It's wasted on her. We could have built something better. The room erupted with gasps. Monica tugged at his arm, whispering for him to stop, but he pulled away, his face flushed with anger. I stood still, my heart pounding but my voice steady. Your father and I built that house with our hands, with years of sacrifice, and you wanted to trade it away as if it meant nothing? Daniel's eyes met mine, and for a flicker of a second, I saw fear, not of me, but of everyone else watching. Uncle George shook his head, disgust plain on his face. Daniel, you've shamed this family. The whispers became open judgment. After that night, nothing was the same for Daniel and Monica. Family gatherings used to be their stage. They were the couple everyone looked to, the ones with polished clothes, rehearsed smiles, and a way of making everything about themselves. But after the confrontation, their aura cracked. The calls from relatives slowed to a stop. Invitations disappeared. People who once laughed at Daniel's jokes now crossed the street to avoid him. The betrayal wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a story carried from one mouth to another, told with shaking heads and bitter sighs. And the cruelest part? Daniel couldn't control the narrative. For years, he had been the one spinning tales, painting himself as the devoted son, the successful man. But now the truth stood taller than his lies, and no amount of charm could bury it. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Every day that passed, I watched his pride unravel. At work, the whispers reached his office. Clients began to wonder, if he could betray his own mother, what would stop him from betraying them? Deals fell through. Partnerships dissolved. The foundation of trust he had built his career on was crumbling. And Monica? She had thought marrying into the family would give her security, stability. Instead, it left her exposed. Her friends, who once admired her ambition, now questioned her morals. Some stopped answering her calls altogether. Others pretended to be busy whenever she tried to meet. The isolation grew, and with it, the tension between. Meanwhile, my life took a different turn. For the first time in years, I felt lighter. Not because the pain had disappeared. It still lingered, like an old wound that aches when the weather shifts. But because I no longer carried the weight of secrets, of pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. Neighbors, friends, even distant relatives came to me quietly, some with sympathy, others with admiration. They said, "You stood tall. You didn't let them break you." It wasn't strength, not really. It was survival. But their words reminded me that I wasn't as alone as I once thought. The house, my house, became my sanctuary again. I walked through its rooms differently now, running my fingers along the walls, remembering the laughter, the sacrifices, the late nights of hard work that built it. Daniel had tried to erase all that with one signature, but he failed. And as for my grandchildren, they began to see me not as a fragile old woman to be pitied, but as someone who had stood firm against betrayal. They asked me questions. They listened to my stories. They hugged me tighter. That was the real victory. But the same couldn't be said for Daniel and Monica. Within months, their facade completely collapsed. Daniel lost his biggest client after word of his betrayal spread further. Monica's own family began keeping their distance, embarrassed by the scandal. Even their closest allies couldn't defend them anymore. And the irony? They still had the house they lived in, but it wasn't enough. The strange thing about revenge is this. It doesn't always come in one big, fiery moment. Sometimes it unfolds slowly, quietly, in the silence that follows when the truth refuses to be hidden. For Daniel and Monica, the silence was deafening. The phone that once rang nonstop with invitations, business offers, and flattery now sat still on their counter. The mailbox, once filled with glossy envelopes and congratulatory cards, turned into a graveyard of overdue bills. Daniel had once stood in front of me, puffed with pride, convinced he was smarter, stronger, untouchable. But when I saw him months later, he looked like a shadow of himself. His suit hung loose, his smile forced. The light in his eyes, that spark of arrogance, was gone. Monica, too, carried the weight of humiliation. The friends she had so carefully curated abandoned her. She tried to keep up appearances online, posting pictures, pretending everything was fine. But even through the screen, you could see the cracks, the forced laughter, the desperate captions. And me? I didn't lift a finger to ruin them. I didn't need to. The truth had already done that. All I did.
The reckoning was not dramatic. It was inevitable. Daniel and Monica drifted into obscurity. They still had each other, but even that bond seemed poisoned. Betrayal eats away at trust, and when two people built their marriage on lies and greed, how long could they last? Meanwhile, my life, ordinary, simple, steady, was filled with something they had lost forever: respect. My grandchildren visited more often. My neighbors greeted me warmly. My family looked at me not as someone fragile, but as someone who had stood her ground. I didn't need to celebrate their downfall. Watching them fade into the background was enough. They had tried to erase me from my own home, from my own story. Instead, they erased themselves. And here's the lesson I want to leave with you. Betrayal never stays hidden. Greed never goes unpunished. And revenge doesn't always mean striking back. It can mean standing tall, speaking once, and letting the truth echo louder than lies. Because in the end, the greatest revenge isn't anger or destruction. It's peace. And that peace was mine.
Have you ever noticed the people who betray you the most are often the ones who smiled at you the brightest? I learned something from all of this. Betrayal doesn't just break your heart, it teaches you who people really are. And revenge doesn't always have to look like a storm. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it's just walking away with your dignity, while the other person drowns in the weight of their own choices. Daniel and Monica thought they had won. They thought they had tricked me, humiliated me, and taken away my power. But in the end, the truth itself became my shield. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to fight dirty. I just needed to stand up once and refuse to be silenced. That was enough to turn their world upside down. So, if you've ever felt betrayed, remember this. You don't need to destroy yourself trying to make others pay. The truth always has a way of finding its voice. And sometimes the strongest revenge is simply to live in peace while they crumble under their own lies. Because real strength isn't about shouting the loudest, it's about standing the tallest.